liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Nicely done, gentlemen. If you have a cell phone, if you could please put it in off or vibrate position, that would be great. Consent agenda.
Consent agenda. All agenda items listed with the designation of CA are considered to be routine items by the governing body and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a member of the governing body so requests and support by 2 other members is received. Any item removed from the consent agenda will be considered in its normal sequence on the agenda.
Thank you. Do I hear? No. All right. Thank you very much. All right. Consent agenda. Is there any item that any member wishes to have pulled off the consent agenda? Any item? All right. Hearing none. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Luna, seconded by Mr. Johnson. All those in favor of consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes.
Next item is number 7, vouchers.
Thank you. Is there any discussion from the public on this matter? Discussion from the public. Hearing none. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Luna, seconded by Mr. Johnson. Discussion by council? Discussion by council. Hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes.
Public hearing for renewal applications for existing city liquor licenses and permits, retail, restaurant, limited retail, resort, bar and grill licenses, and microbrewery and satellite distillery permits filed with the city clerk's office.
Thank you. Is there any public comment on this matter? Any public comment on this matter? Hearing none. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Oh, thank you. No motion is needed. Do we have any discussion from council? Any discussion from council? Okay, hearing none, this being a matter for public hearing, the subject of this matter being met, the public hearing is now closed. And it will be referred to Finance Committee.
Thank you. Ordinance second reading, amending section 10.52.200, recreational vehicle, trailer defined, parking permitted in certain places, of chapter 10.52, stopping, standing, and parking generally, of title 10, vehicles and traffic of the code of the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Case.
as the original sponsor of this ordinance, I wish to withdraw this matter from further consideration.
Is there any objection by members of the council? Any objection by members of the council? Hearing none, this matter has been removed from the agenda.
Ordinance first reading, amending section 1.16.050, off-site improvements requirements of chapter 1.16, annexation and infrastructure improvements of title 1, general provisions of the code of the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming.
This item is referred to Public Services Committee.
Next item is number 15A on page 3, consideration of RFP-14-18 for the new site of the City of Cheyenne Municipal Court, 1% specific purpose sales and use tax.
Thank you. We'll start with staff report.
Vicki Nemechek, Public Works Director. On May 2nd, 2017, the voters of Laramie County approved a ballot question allocating $9 million to the City of Cheyenne for the construction of a new municipal court. The ballot question allows a remodel or addition to the current municipal building or construction at a new location. On August 8th, 2017, the Public Works Department issued RFP 3-18 for design, preparation of plans and specifications, bidding assistance, construction manager at risk assistance, and construction administration for the new municipal court. We received 3 proposals, conducted interviews, then selected Noel Griffith Jr. and Associates Architects as the successful consultant. This is where we should have done a contract with the consultant, but we didn't have 6 penny funds available at that time. We're working with a bank now, but before we can borrow funds, we must have a location identified. The project team for the municipal court site, made up of myself, Chief of Staff Eric Fountain, Facilities Maintenance Manager Mike Wright, and Facilities Maintenance Foreman Steve Gear, met with the selected consultant in September 2017 to discuss moving forward with the project. The primary focus at that time was on temporary relocation of the court and building to the north of the existing municipal building. As the project team continued its evaluation of building the new court to the north of the existing municipal building, we became aware of many challenges. We eventually reached the conclusion that the north lot was not the best possible location for the new court for myriad reasons. However, we did not adequately communicate that finding to the City Council or the public. That fact became apparent during the January 29, 2018 City Council work session when we presented evaluations of the proposed sites received in response to RFP 14-18, Invitation for Proposals for the Municipal Court Site. To correct that, I will present our evaluation of the north lot now. This evaluation is based on the same criteria used to evaluate the Cary Building, Hines Building, Mayflower Building, and vacant lot on 18th Street. That criteria includes: 1, the facility should have 10 to 11,000 square feet of usable space. 2, the location should have adequate parking for 40 to 50 vehicles for both staff and customers. 3, the facility must meet security requirements of a municipal court. 4, cost of the facility must be within the $9 million budget. 5, preferably the site should be within the downtown area. And 6, benefit of new construction and renovation to the community and impact on the historic district. The project team, with assistance from the consultant, evaluated the area north of the municipal building for these criteria with the following results. First, usable space. The site does provide opportunity to locate the 10 to 11,000 square feet either as an addition or as a standalone building. However, variances would be required. In addition, the footprint may need to be larger than the 10 to 11,000 square feet due to the need for dual public entrances. The front of the building should face O'Neill or West 22nd. However, public parking is available in the Cox parking structure. That would lead to a larger lobby to accommodate 2 entrances that funnel the public to a single security screening station. Adding a second floor should also be considered to enhance scale of the building elevation and provide for future city expansion and growth. A second floor would add the cost of an elevator or stairwell, even if we built as an addition, as floor heights would not align to existing municipal building floor levels. Courts require higher ceiling heights, similar to this council chambers. The second criteria is parking. The north parking lot will be impacted by both an addition and a standalone building. There are currently 130 parking stalls available in the north lot. A court addition would result in about 75 remaining slots, or loss of 55 stalls. A standalone court would result in about 65 remaining stalls, or a loss of 65 stalls. I do have a worksheet. I believe you've all seen it. I'll quickly go through what the requirements are for parking with the UDC, and then what we feel is functionally required. The UDC parking requires, for assembly, which is the Civic Center, 1 space per 5 seats. There are 1,500 seats in the Civic Center. General office space for a building 50,000 square feet or larger is 1 space per 400 square feet. And general office for a structure of 50,000 square feet or less is 1 space per 300 square feet. The court building addition will be 11,000 square feet. So with a large courtroom, 2 hearing rooms, and general office, there would be a requirement for 57 spaces if it were attached to the city building, and 63 spaces if it were built as a standalone. In addition, the city building, which is 50,000 square feet, would require 125 spaces. The Civic Center is 1,500 seats, 1 per 5, would mean we need 300 spaces for the Civic Center. And then the back of house area is 27,800 square feet and would require 70 spaces. That's the area where the office is, where the symphony practices, the area where they, all the other areas of the Civic Center, basically. So that's 370 spaces for the Civic Center. So total, we would need according to the UDC, we would need 552 spaces if it's attached to the city building, 558 spaces if it were standalone. Now we do get some credit for shared parking. So there is a table in the UDC that takes that 552 or 558 down to 396. So we're at 396 spaces. Then we can get some credit. So we're going to get 54 credits for the Cox parking garage. you get 1 credit for every 3 public parking spaces. And I'll explain how many about the spaces, but there are right now 163 available spots in the Cox. And then we get 39 more credits for on-street parking. We also chose to take 1 bicycle parking credit and 1 transit credit. We didn't feel that it was appropriate to take more than that. So the total credits are 95. So we had a requirement of 396 minus the 95 leaves us the UDC requirement of 301 spaces. So that's what the UDC requires, 301 spaces. Then we looked at it a little differently. Functionally, what do we really need? We have 100 city employees in this building. We have 30 city fleet vehicles that are permanently assigned to this city building, either organizations or people assigned here. We estimated that we'd have at any one time 20 visitors to the city building. That would be people attending meetings, people doing business here, but 20 at any one time we thought was a reasonable estimate. We need 50 for the courts, staff, and customers, and then another 10 for the city council and the mayor that has normally been set aside. And we felt that 300 spaces for the Civic Center was probably unrealistic. That means you have 5 people in every car. We felt it was more appropriate to reduce that to actually increase the number of spaces to 400 that we would need. That's 3.75 people per car, which we felt was more realistic than 5 people in a car. So that gives us a total of 610 spaces functionally required. But not everyone goes to the Civic Center and the municipal building at the same time. So you have some employment and some entertainment requirements. So the highest number that we felt we needed at any one time was 421 spaces. So we need 421. 300 is what the UDC requires. So the north lot has 130 right now. The west lot has 186. And on street we have 39. So the current parking spaces are 355. Available in the Cox is 163. So all available spaces add up to 518 right now. But we're going to lose the west lot when the Civic Center Commons project is completed. That's minus 186. And then minus the north lot, we're looking at additional 55 to 65 slots. So the future parking that we're going to have is 279 spaces. But functionally, we said the lowest number that we needed was 421. UDC requires 300. So the total parking spaces required per the UDC for the City Municipal Complex, which is the west side of this block, which includes the Civic Center, the Municipal Building, and then right now the north lot, but the new location of the court. That's the City Municipal Complex. So the total parking spaces required per the UDC for the City Municipal Complex, which is the west side of the block, must be provided, it is approximately 300 parking stalls, which must be provided on site. The UDC requires that we provide those on this half of the block. Although we can receive credits for parking spaces in the Cox parking structure, they cannot be counted one-to-one unless they are designated or reserved for city municipal building use only. The Cox structure has 542 total parking stalls. The county has a 40-year lease for 190 of those stalls, commencing in 1995 when the structure was completed. So that takes 190 stalls till 2035. There are also 2 state leases, other business and individual rentals, and miscellaneous reserve slots, including handicap designations, leaving the approximately 163 stalls available, which is where I came up with that number. So in summary on parking, the site can meet court parking requirements of providing 40 to 50 parking spaces, but it does not meet the quantity needed for the city municipal complex. Although there are options available that would qualify this site to meet UDC parking requirements, such as implementing additional credits and deductions to lower the quantity of UDC required parking, bicycle, transit, motorcycle, carpool slots that we could take credits for, or reserving additional parking spaces in the Cox, currently open to the public, for a city municipal complex only. The project team determined that locating the court in the north lot was not desirable because it placed too great a burden on parking for this and the surrounding areas. The next criteria is security. This site has the potential to meet the security requirements, separate parking, entrances, and restrooms for staff and public, but a possible dual entrance presents a design challenge in providing a single security screening area. The budget. This site can meet the $9 million project budget. However, there are additional considerations that may be incorporated into the project that would put this site over budget to an estimated $11.3 million. Those considerations would be a second-story shell for future expansion and possibly adding an elevator or stairwell on the Cox Garage northeast corner to make parking in that structure more convenient for court customers. The next criteria, site location. This site is zoned P, public, and has different requirements than the other proposals that were all zoned CBD. Public zoning does have performance standards that allow for alternate standards that may be approved by at the city's discretion. For preliminary evaluation purposes, the variances that may be required to locate the courts on the north lot are a variance for the 50% lot coverage, a variance for 50-foot setbacks, a variance for open space, a variance for parking, and a variance for drainage. The last criteria is benefit to the community and impact on the historic district. Although the municipal complex is not located in the historic district, there were several community concerns reviewed by the project team. For example, if an addition or standalone court facility is incorporated into this site, there may not be another economical opportunity for expansion of the city municipal complex in the future. We would basically have done our last expansion with this court building in the north lot. We don't believe it is realistic to expect court customers to park in the Cox lot and walk, especially since the stairs and the elevators are on the south side of the structure only. Budget does not allow adding an elevator or stairwell to the northeast corner of the Cox Garage. We did not feel that we would be good neighbors to the school and the library by increasing vehicle traffic and more on-street parking immediately adjacent to facilities that are primarily used by children. We did not feel it was reasonable to designate the majority of the 163 parking stalls available in the Cox lot for city municipal building use only. It would basically be 130 slots, 100 city employees and 30 city fleet vehicles. And the lost revenue, for 120 designated parking stalls, I figured that would be a reasonable number to designate, would be approximately $65,000 annually. If the slots are not designated, it's not reasonable to expect all 100 city employees to pay $45 per month to park in the Cox lot. A significant number would compete for other available free parking, including adjacent residential areas. The Civic Center Commons project will reduce parking stalls by 186. We felt adequate Civic Center parking availability was critical. And we weren't sure if the governing body would have the political will to approve alternate standards and variances for this project when other developers don't have that same opportunity. After consideration of these project objectives, the project team determined that the north lot was not a desirable site for the new municipal court. So now I'll move on from the north lot to the site RFP. Following the determination that the north lot was not desirable, media coverage that the city was looking for a site other than the north lot for the new municipal court spurred significant discussion within city government and input from numerous citizens regarding the location of the new municipal court. The mayor, city attorney, and project team then discussed issuing an RFP. In response, we issued RFP 14-18, Invitation for Proposals for the New Municipal Court Site, on November 14, 2017. RFP 14-18 included a general description of the project, the date, time, and place proposals were due, and where interested parties could obtain the RFP documents. An advertisement was published in the local newspaper twice, a week apart, notifying the prospective proposers that proposals were being accepted. The RFP included multiple sections: introduction, description of existing site, project objectives, submittal requirements, schedule, compensation, selection process, criteria for evaluating proposals, rejection of proposals, and miscellaneous information. Proposals were due at noon, December 4th, 2017. The RFP was issued as a general call for proposed new municipal court sites. I wrote the RFP specifically so that proposers would not need to hire a consultant to prepare their proposals. Normally, proposals can cost a firm between $5,000 and $10,000 to prepare. The RFP included the statement, proposals will be reviewed and ranked for feasibility by a professional consultant, then referred to the Selection Advisory Committee. The expectation was a proposer could put together a proposal quickly with very little time or money invested in the process. The city would then bear the cost of evaluating proposals for their feasibility and meeting our project objectives. We simply wanted to provide as many proposers an opportunity to submit a site as possible. 6 proposals were submitted for 5 locations. The Carey, also known as the Fowler's or Z's Building at 308 West 17th Street. The Heinz Building at 1602 Capitol Avenue. The Mayflower Building at 112 West 17th Street. The Teton Building at 1803 Capitol Avenue. And a vacant lot at 18th Street between Bent Avenue and O'Neill Avenue. Two proposals were submitted for the Carey, also known as the Fowler and Z's Building. The Teton Building was later withdrawn by the proposer. Noel Griffith Jr. and Associates Architects, as the project consultant selected through the original RFP process, was selected to review and rank the proposals. I instructed the consultant to limit their review to the first 4 objectives: usable space, adequate parking, security requirements, and budget. I felt the remaining objectives, site location, and benefit to the community and impact on the historic district, were political considerations to be evaluated and decided on by the governing body. I further instructed the consultant to evaluate the proposals as proposed. The expectation is always that proposers provide accurate, complete information as requested in the RFP. The consultant was familiar with the current state of the Heinz Building, Mayflower Building, and Teton Building. The consultant was not familiar with the vacant lot nor the current state of the Carey Building. The consultant visited the vacant lot, took photos, and did some preliminary investigation. Since the Carey, also known as the Fowler's and Z structure, was not open to the public, I arranged a visit to the site. I accompanied the consultant and instructed him that there would be no discussion with the representative providing access. Between the time the proposals were received on December 4, 2017, and when the Site Selection Committee met on January 10, 2018, there was some discussion of rejecting all proposals. I believe that discussion was the result of publication of the proposed sites, and many believing that none of the proposals received would meet the first 4 project objectives as defined in the RFP: usable space, adequate parking, security, and budget. That was proven wrong when the Site Selection Committee reviewed the results of the proposal evaluations in January of 2018. Just to make a point here, the cost of delay is approximately 5% each year. On a $9 million project, that's $450,000 a year to delay, or $37,500 a month. And I would just say that it would be more beneficial fiscally to start designing actually two different locations, 2 different sites, than it would be to delay this process any further. At $37,500 a month, that money adds up. And to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars, we have gone through this process quickly, but not hurriedly. So the consultant submitted a written proposal evaluation on January 8, 2017. The Site Selection Advisory Committee, consisting of Mayor Orr, City Councilman Brian Cook, DDA Representative Del Lummis, Municipal Court Judge Mark Moran, and City Attorney Sylvia Hackle, met on January 10, 2018, where the consultant provided a review of the evaluation report. Each proposal was discussed in its ranked order, starting with the least feasible, progressing to the most feasible. The Carey Building, also known as the Z's Building in Fowler's, submission was ranked as the most feasible. It meets the usable space, parking, and security requirements. With a moderate level of historical facade design and the owner's proposal to sell the site for $275,000, this proposal also meets the project budget. This site is also within the preferred downtown area. Finally, the Selection Advisory Committee discussed the substantial benefit of new construction to our community at this abandoned and deteriorating site. Following the presentation and discussion, the committee voted unanimously to accept the report for full council consideration and further recommend support of the conclusion that the Carey Building or site is the most appropriate for the municipal courthouse. Staff recommends purchasing the Carey Building, also known as Z's or Fowler's, located at 308 West 17th Street, for $275,000.
Thank you very much for that presentation. As a kind of a point of order and housekeeping, what I'm going to do is allow council to ask questions of Director Nemechek while she's standing. But for any of you that may have joined us late and don't know, the ordinance regarding RVs or trailers on property locations, that has been set aside essentially indefinitely. In speaking with the sponsor who asked that it be pulled, it will be several months before that has. So if you were waiting to speak to that, you can either leave or there will be time for you to express your opinions during other business when we get through the agenda. So if you have some place that you need to be or want to get dinner and want to discuss that later, feel free to leave us and communicate with us at another time. What I'm going to do is allow council then to ask questions of Director Nemechek, and then I will open it up for full public question and comments. And if you do have a comment or a question, if you wouldn't mind stating your name, and if you're with an organization that you represent, please represent that as well. And I recognize that former Mayor Erickson is here and want to welcome Mayor Erickson. Thank you for your attendance tonight. All right, with that, are there questions of council for Director Nemechek? Questions of council? Mr. Laybourne.
Madam Mayor, Mrs. Nemechek, I couldn't attend the Finance Committee meeting, so this information you just brought forward is new to me. But I have a couple questions that I believe are relevant to this discussion, and I'd like to ask them now. Question number one is, what will be required to conduct a professional, legally adequate evaluation of the state of our municipal building regarding Americans with Disabilities Act concerns, taking into consideration the recent remodel of the restrooms for the council chamber courtroom? And the reason I ask that question is because I didn't hear in your review any consideration of those issues, although when this site is considered for improvement or remodel, they obviously are issues. And I can see right here that we made some substantial changes, good changes, I think, to accommodate the court. But what will be required to conduct a review of this building?
Mr. Laybourne, actually that is a question that we have discussed and is more appropriate for our legal counsel, being that it is a legal matter. And so with that, Ms. Sylvia Hackle will answer your question on the legal ADA requirements. Please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Sylvia Hackle, City Attorney. Councilman Laybourne, I'm guessing it was 3-4 weeks ago, Alessandra McCoy, Assistant City Attorney, did send out a memo that analyzed in very high-level terms the impact of remodeling or renovation on an existing building in terms of triggering further ADA compliance aspects. The bottom line is no one can ever know for sure, but we've actually had experience with that here in the city. When the city acquired the Ice and Events Center, there had been a Department of Justice complaint from a citizen who said that that facility was not ADA accessible. At that time, what was then the Department of Parks and Recreation, which is now the Community Recreation and Events Department, obtained an analysis from a consultant who specializes in ADA issues, got the report, and reported back to the Department of Justice that we now know what is necessary to bring this building into compliance, and we will do so. And that resolved the complaint. A similar process is underway for our Civic Center right now. That would be how we would need to proceed to ascertain with specificity what further renovations would be required of this building in order to be totally ADA compliant. Has the work that we have already done probably triggered further ADA compliance? Actually, work we did prior to moving the municipal court here probably triggered those requirements. This building has been under some form of, if you will, remodeling for quite a number of years. As you know, many of the walls are movable. The council itself moved. So hiring a consultant, having that full analysis brought to the council would enable you to see the cost and to decide upon a plan to address those concerns. So that will be what is necessary to completely ascertain what is required to bring this 1979 building into full ADA compliance.
Mr.
I'd like to respond to that. Of course, I recall all the trouble we had with the Ice and Event Center and the ADA issues there, and that memo from Alessandra McCoy was at my request. And I think it very clearly showed that we need to make that analysis, not for the benefit of Pete Laybourne, as you just noted, but for the benefit of the community and the council. There is no doubt that before we proceed with any further action, we need to understand that issue. And I don't believe that it is probably appropriate for the citizens to have to make that complaint. I think we know we have that issue. We've all got the memo. What are we waiting for? It just seems to me that it's irresponsible on our part to expect the public to file a complaint with the Department of Justice when we're well aware of the problem. So I appreciate that explanation. I have another question as well.
Mr. Laybourne, let me answer that direct comment. And you're absolutely right. The community and the governing body absolutely needs to have that that full understanding. And as I have communicated with a good member of the council members, what you will see in the budget that will be presented to you here in the upcoming months will be a budget request to do just that, to do a full analysis, architectural and engineering, for bringing this building, the Civic Center, up to code, up to standard. It obviously needs to be remodeled, and probably even including our fire stations as well. But in order to, and what we're looking at doing is providing you with, so we would essentially hire architectural and engineering consultants to come up with a master facilities plan so that you as a governing body may consider placing it on the next sixth penny ballot initiative, because we are probably looking at a substantial $20, $30, $40 million renovation for our city facilities that have been inadequately taken care of.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Shaner.
Councilman Laybourne, while we're on that first question, may I add some follow-ups on that topic? First is just a point of information that Director Nemechek did give a very rough estimate to me of about $15,000 to have this building fully evaluated for ADA. So if we doubled that for the Civic Center, 30, and then if we had other facilities. So that's kind of just a ballpark cost that I was provided. And then, Madam Mayor, through you to the City Attorney. So the comparison was made to an OCR agreement we made related to the Ice and Event Center. And I see two main questions with that comparison. One, what was the time frame we submitted to OCR to say, hey, we've got a plan, we're going to complete it in X number of months or years? And two, was the funding to complete that plan contingent upon voter approval at the time?
Madam Mayor, through you, Sylvia Hackle, City Attorney. To be honest, Councilman Shaner, I did not ask for that information from Teresa Moore. I'm wondering if she is with us. I think she is. She may have those answers. I'm relatively certain nothing was submitted to the voters. But I believe Ms. Moore can answer your other questions.
Thank you.
Teresa Moore, Community Recreation and Events. Actually, to provide a little bit of clarity, the DOJ complaint actually did not trigger the study for what was required to bring the building up to. Once a DOJ complaint is filed, you basically have to respond to that complainant and take action. And so it had to do with the elevator. And I believe there was no elevator, and I think that was the issue, is that we ended up having to install an elevator within a certain time period by the DOJ mandate. And so that was done, and it was done basically not through the voters. It was something that we had to come up with funding for and address at that time. It was sort of through that process that we realized what sort of predicament that the city was in terms of not identifying or having a plan to rectify our ADA requirements in all of our facilities. So it was at that time that we then instigated having a firm come in, and they analyzed all of our recreation facilities as to what ADA shortages we had. It included the swimming pool, it included playgrounds, it included basically everything. And what we were told by the consultants when they did that is that essentially what you're doing is demonstrating to the DOJ that you have a plan and that you are working towards making progress to rectifying the situation. I think what you have, there was no time frame specifically that it had to be accomplished. Basically, you just have to, what we did is each year that we correct as many problems as we can, and that's how we proceed, and it's typically within whatever budgetary accommodations that we have to move forward with that plan. It has, I think, protected the city by having that kind of plan in effect. I will tell you that we have already instigated having that assessment done at the Civic Center, just because we have had public concerns about some of the ADA issues. So that is already underway. And again, to my knowledge, that it is not, there's not a hard and fast time frame to accomplish those goals. You simply have to have the plan, have identified the issues, and show that you're making progress. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, one small follow-up.
Sure.
Mr. Laborn, is that okay? Thank you. That does help quite a bit. If you know, if you don't, totally understand. But what percentage of that plan that we submitted have we been able to accomplish since we submitted that to DOJ?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I do not have that number. I could find out the projects. Okay. I can tell you we have made progress, which is the good news, with each playground replacement, with each restroom replacement that we have done, that we have ticked off another issue. So we definitely are making progress, but in terms of, we still have a long ways to go.
Sure.
But I could certainly come up with some sort of list as to what kind of progress we're making.
Thank you. Nothing further, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Laborn.
Madam Mayor, well, I'm glad to hear that such a plan is in progress. I certainly wasn't aware of it until I heard your answer tonight. But I want to express my concern about that approach. I believe, as I read ADA, as I understand the situation, when we very rightly made those ADA improvements across the hall to those restrooms and to that observation room right there, that makes a big difference, as opposed to buildings where no ADA improvements were made, such as the fire stations, for instance. I think that's a very important legal point that we need to consider. And I would also point out that we just passed the capital facilities tax last May. I'm not sure, considering that it's a sales tax and it's collected as we go, when that'll happen. But my assumption is we're looking out 4 or 5 years probably for that to that cycle to be collected and to us to begin again. And I really wonder if that is reasonable and realistic and would be interpreted as such. So I believe I've expressed my concern about that first question. I'd like to ask this second question.
Mr. Laborn.
Are we paying Mr. Griffith professional services without a contract? Is there a written explanation as to why a contract with Mr. Griffith was not brought before the council? And by way of explanation, let me say that we've been paying in the vouchers regular payments to Mr. Griffith, and certainly in your approach tonight, in your presentation, Mrs. Nemechek, you repeatedly referred to him as the consultant. I did hear your explanation as to that we couldn't hire the consultant because we don't have the arrangements to complete the bonding for the building, and that really the funding wasn't available. I just want to go on record as saying I'm very concerned about that. I believe that the responsibility of this council is to hire, through a contract, the consultants that do important work of this nature. I'm very concerned that we have at least 2 arrangements with Mr. Griffith, and we're paying him for some of the information that's come forward without a contract. And the fact that it's a question of finances, I find particularly perplexing in light of the fact that we've been paying him. It seems to me we're trying to have it both ways here. And Madam Attorney,
Mr. Laborn,
I'd like an interpretation of that, if we could, as in my question here, as to a written explanation, which I don't believe exists. A written explanation of the law involved in the fact that we're using some very unusual procedures here to hire a consultant, and obviously what's conceived of here is a much, much larger contract for the design of the building. Not the evaluation of the sites, the design of the building, which appears to me to be headed to Mr. Griffith without our approval at this point. So you go down the road, make those payments, use that consultant, and that pretty much seems to me is headed in the direction of the inevitable fact that Mr. Griffith is going to get that large contract. I don't believe that's proper procedure, and I would appreciate some analysis from your office, Mrs. Hackle.
Mr. Laborn, to clarify for me, because I was unable to write it, and for the record, I heard several statements, and unsure if you could please clarify a specific question and to whom.
Okay. The specific question is, why is Mr. Griffith working for us in a very major way involving very significant decisions without a contract?
Okay, thank you. Mr. Laborn. Ms. Nemechek.
Vicki Nemechek, Public Works, through you, Mayor, to Mr. Laborn. I did prepare a response to that question that describes the policy in the purchasing manual. It's similar to the description I gave for the temporary relocation of the court. Part 3 of the Purchasing Policy and Procedures Manual, which covers procurement of professional services, paragraph 1A states, although Wyoming statute 15-1-113A specifically exempts contracts for professional services from bidding requirements, the city has determined that it should adopt a formal procedure for the selection of these services. Paragraph 1B goes on to say, the services addressed in this procedure apply to contracts with architects, engineers, and land surveyors which totaled $35,000 or more. Part 3, page 3.2, paragraph 1A, note states, Contracts for less than $35,000 do not require proposals. However, contracts between $5,000 and $35,000 should be awarded based upon a selection of a qualified firm by a 3-person committee. The Municipal Court Project Team, consisting of myself, Chief of Staff Eric Fountain, Facilities Maintenance Manager Mike Wright, and Facilities Maintenance Foreman Steve Gear, agreed that since Noel Griffith Jr. and Associates Architects was the selected consultant for RFP-3-18, we would seek to negotiate a price for municipal court site evaluation services from them. I received a price proposal from the consultant for $27,200 to evaluate and prepare a report. I again consulted with the team. We felt the price proposal was reasonable. Since the proposal was below the $35,000 threshold that must be approved by City Council, and in the interest of time, I prepared a purchase order instead of a professional services agreement. A purchase order does constitute a contract and includes language on the reverse that makes that abundantly clear. In short, I have followed the procedures outlined in the purchasing manual in procurement of these services.
Thank you, Ms. Tackle. Will you confirm purchase order as a contract for the sake of Mr. Laybourne?
Madam Mayor, yes. A purchase order is a contract to engage in services and then allow for the payment of city funds.
Thank you, Mr. Laybourne.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to ask Mrs. Nemechek, did the committee receive and consider a much larger proposal from Mr. Griffith's firm for the entire project?
Vicki Nemechek, Public Works, through you, Mayor, to Mr. Laybourne. We did, however, it did not include a site proposal evaluation. We did not foresee an RFP process.
Well,
Mr. Laybourne.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, members of the community, this is really a poor way to go about our business. We go and skirt the proper procedure here and give Mr. Griffith two, I believe, to this point, purchase orders, basically, which turn into contracts. And then that turns into, how much, can you, off the top of your head, tell me what the proposed amount of Mr. Griffith's contract would be if he was chosen as the consultant on the entire project, not the site selection?
Vicki Nemechek, Public Works, through you, Mayor, to Mr. Laybourne. Yes, it was in excess of $600,000.
Well, I want to express my concern about backdooring that kind of contract.
Mr. Laybourne, I do not believe that that contract has been awarded and is not germane to this discussion.
Well, my point is, Madam Mayor, you go down the road, you start paying him.
Mr. Laybourne, that contract has not been awarded to this individual.
I'm certainly not arguing that point, Madam Mayor. I'm pointing out that this is improper procedure, and this takes away our responsibility to explain to these people and to the community how we arrive at these decisions. And if Mr. Griffith brought before the committee a price of his services, then we should have acted on that. Instead of going through these two purchase orders, calling them contracts, and I absolutely do not regret calling it a backdoor arrangement. I believe it is. So thank you very much. I appreciate the time, and I'm sure we'll be discussing this as we proceed.
Thank you. Are there other questions for Ms. Nemechek?
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Case.
I will be as brief as I can.
Which means not so brief, as I've learned. With not just you, whenever we... Go ahead, Mr. Case.
I'm certainly, from my day job, familiar with the RFP process, and in my experience, any RFP that's deficient in these processes is rejected on its face. And I could be incorrect, but I believe that At least I've been told by a handful of people that all of these RFPs were deficient in some respect. Can you talk to that?
So your question is, were all, if I am hearing you correctly, were all submissions deficient in some respect?
Correct.
Ms. Nemechek.
Vicki Nemechek, Public Works, through you, Mayor, to Mr. Case. The one that met all of the criteria as proposed was the Cary site. It was not deficient in any of the, either the security, budget, parking, or usable space criteria.
Mr. Case.
So if that's the case, then why, just out of curiosity, Mayor, through you, would we continue with evaluation with any of the other locations, such as the vacant lot? And why were they evaluated and then just not rejected on their face? Is that our procurement process to go ahead and say, well, we only have so many to deal with and we really just need to move forward? Or
Mr. Case, I will answer that. Being on the committee, rather than reject everything and present to you, the council, only one option, we brought to you everything that was submitted and to let you see in full scope everything that was there so that you were made fully aware of all of these submissions. The committee specifically did not reject any of the bids so that you as council could.
Okay,
Mr. Case?
Fair enough. Then, I personally believe that we weren't given all the information that we need, particularly in respect to the vacant lot, because a full analysis was not done on that location.
Mr. Case, to answer that, we again only presented the information that was presented. It is not up for RFP and RFQs. We cannot simply do the homework for them. If information is not submitted, be it a dumpster loader, as you mentioned, it's not up for our department, the executive branch, to go forward and ask further questions. So you were presented all of the information that was presented to the council or to the committee.
Okay, then I guess that through you, Mayor, what exactly did then we pay a consultation fee for? What did we pay the consultant for if the consultant was, is that outside of the scope to pick up the phone and say, hey, this looks deficient and I'd like some more information so that I can give equal weighting to each location?
Mr. Case, when it comes to RFPs, and this, this has been new for me, and I can tell you that I've experienced this with major equipment purchases. We, as a city, it's against state statute and against our policy and purchase, we cannot go forward and submit and ask additional questions and ask them to resubmit their RFP. We cannot do that homework for them. That is not how RFPs and RFQs work. I consider it. My analysis was to other committee. It's much like a math assignment. If one student flunks the math assignment on a test, you don't do away with the entire test. Help that student through getting the correct answer and then re-give that test. You cannot do that work for anyone. And I will tell you, this has been very, very obviously public, and we have not heard any. I've not gotten one call from that individual or company that owns that piece of land. We have not had any call for follow-up to say, hey, let us resubmit, let us play again. We have heard crickets from that particular proposal.
Fair enough.
Unless there's somebody here tonight representing them, and we'd love to hear from them in public comment.
So then, Mayor, probably for you or someone else, really what we have is a situation that we did go ahead and evaluate deficient RFPs, brought those into the fold and presented to council. Mm-hmm. And I could be wrong, but I guess I'd like a legal opinion on whether that deviates from our procurement process.
Yes,
and if so, we only have one bid before us, but we evaluated the other, so we really don't just have one bid before us. Help me unpack that, please.
Madam Mayor, through you, Sylvia Hackle, City Attorney. That's a little difficult to do, Councilman Case, on a moment's notice, but here's what I will tell you. As you well know, on a general basis, when a bid comes before you, let's say for a large piece of equipment at our landfill, you only see the successful bid. And that's come up at Finance Committee a couple of times just in this calendar year. Do we get to see the other bids? And the answer is no. I think that's Mr. Johnson's favorite question. And so this is unusual in that you've now seen everything that got submitted to the site in response to the RFP on the site selection. I don't think that that changes the nature of the resolution that is before you. If we were purchasing a piece of equipment, you would have a contract before you to proceed with that purchase. Because we are not purchasing a piece of equipment, but proceeding potentially to move forward on it would be a subsequent purchase agreement for a piece of property, then you have this resolution before you. I spent quite some time with our purchasing policy today and did discuss this with another of the assistant city attorneys, and how this got here to you today, what you have in front of you, I believe comports with the city purchasing policy. Is it a little out of the normal course? Yes. Does that make it illegal? No.
Other questions,
Okay,
Mr.
just
Case?
a couple more as follow-ups. I understand, Madam Mayor, what Ms. Hackle is trying to say here, but we're not buying a fire truck here. We're doing a major construction project, and I'm really of the opinion that this should be a process that is unpacked transparently in front of the entire public at large, as well as the City Council. And I guess I'd just follow up with two final questions. Are we absolutely 100% certain that the water in that building is coming from the top and not the bottom? In other words, is it coming from the ceiling or is it bubbling up from groundwater? Or is that speculation?
Mr. Case, I see Mr. Griffith coming to the stand.
Madam Mayor, through you, Mr. Case, the answer to that is that it is undoubtedly both. The majority of the water that is in the lower level certainly has come from the roof and come through the building. But there is certainly, without exception, and some groundwater, surface water that has come into the building. I did talk to a gentleman that had worked in Fowler's for years, and every time they had a major water issue down in the downtown area, they did have water in that lower level. Everything was on pallets, and they worked with it.
Okay.
Mr. Case.
And
Does that answer your question, sir?
well, I guess it answers my question, but what we don't have, Madam Mayor, is an engineering analysis as to what percentage of the water is coming from above and what percentage is coming from below.
For that reason, to tell you that the engineering would be done if, in fact, we're going to build on that site. The proposal right now is to not put a basement because of underground water in the downtown area is quite high. So the proposal be without a basement. I have taken the structural engineer that we'd be using on our project through it. We've looked at it, and we're in concert that a single floor, 2-floor building without a basement certainly will be without a problem in that area. And I've built other buildings in that area without basements and had no problem.
Okay.
Mr. Case.
Thank you, Mr. Griffith. Madam Mayor, one more question, and then I'll just follow up with a statement. What contractually should we award this RFP tonight are the property owners committing to, or could they continue to pursue other options until such point that we come to a financial agreement and actually acquire the property?
I am unsure that that we have that. There might be some comment later in public comment, but city staff, Vicki Nemechek, does not have that answer. Any other questions for Ms. Nemechek?
No more questions for Ms. Nemechek. I just, my final comment is I'm very concerned that we're going to spend almost 18% if we move forward with this proposal of the $9 million in simple property acquisition. So might leave that for later comment. Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Thank you very much. Mr. White.
I did have a question for
Perfect.
Ms. Nemechek.
Okay.
Ms. Nemechek, could you explain why the RFP was fast-tracked? I mean to say, why was it only out for a couple of weeks? Standard practice from my day job is every RFP has to be at least 30 days. So I'm just curious as to why this was much less.
Vicki Nemechek, Public Works, through you, Mayor, to Mr. White. The decision really was based on that general purpose system. It wasn't something that you had to have to go out and get a consultant to build you a proposal. Most of these proposals were a simple 2 or 3 pages long of just saying how they met the objectives and nothing more. Probably could have been done in a couple of hours. It was they were open for not quite 3 weeks, and as I said before, the cost of delay is significant. $37,500 a month is what we're looking at to delay the cost of this, and we can't move forward with funding. There's no one that wishes more that I had a CMAR contract right now. That is a problem because we do not have six-penny funding, and we cannot get six-penny funding until we have a site. So we are trying to move this along as reasonably quickly as we can, but I would again say not hurriedly. We didn't have anyone call us and ask us questions. We didn't have anyone call and say they needed more time. We had a few people after the fact that said they had buildings available, but no one during the process that called and said, just give me another week, just give me another month, just give me another day. Nobody, not one call. So I would again say the cost of delay is my primary concern, and getting a site so we can move forward with financing and get moving on this project is why that wasn't out for that long.
Thank you. And just one comment, even if somebody had called and requested an extension, you can't do that. I mean, RFP deadlines are usually pretty hard and fast. Sometimes they get extended due to lack of vendor bids, but usually when the deadline hits, that's it.
Vicki Nemechek, Public Works, to you, Mayor. Actually, if they had questions or requested more time for a certain reason, just like there's an addenda process through the bid process, I think we could have, I'm not a lawyer, but I think we could have extended that time frame if we'd been asked, but we were not asked at all.
Thank you.
And Mr. White, to also add on to that, as far as how we got to the RFP process, as you well know, this courthouse was placed on the ballot and brought forward by the governing body even prior to my election. Mm-hmm. And so the community knew that the courthouse was going to be on the ballot, and then they knew in May at the special election that it had passed. And what my office had realized once it had passed, that there was significant then consideration, and how do we fairly deal with that? But we had people that had submitted proposals much ahead of when we had even officially opened up the RFP, and so from the executive level, we we thought it best to put it out there for the community, and we all know how closely tied our real estate and developer community is, and how we didn't ask that much of them, really. We said, give us an idea, a square footage that you can meet it, and you'd be considered. It was not as rigorous as most are. We also did it within that time frame before the end of the year, knowing that folks have leases with current tenants, and how to when it's property and you've got leases and you're looking into the next year, how do you make that financial decision? So we were also trying to be expedient for the property owners, so that they could make a decision: do I sign a new lease or a contract with a current or potential tenant, or should I cut bait and and go with what I have? So that really played significantly into it as well, and I can't echo it enough. We weren't trying to subvert a process. We were trying to be actually respectful to everybody involved.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions of Ms. Nemechek, because I think there are some others here that would like to speak as well. All right, thank you, Ms. Nemechek. Other public discussion? Please come forward, and if you're in the middle and need to get out, we ask, just for the sake of time, if you kind of queue up, that'll keep this moving along. Thank you. If you did introduce yourself.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Wendy Volk, Number One Properties. I did submit a proposal, and it was after the fact of the deadline. It was on a property that's directly across the street from here at 1920 Thomes Avenue. It's the City Center building. It's approximately 36,000 square feet of office space with less than 90 parking spaces off-street. It would be a natural progression, I would say, of expanding our existing city government campus. We had 7 property owners. In 3 weeks, I could not get 7 property owners all on the same page, because several of them are owner-occupants in the building. And we also had to be very careful. So we could not, I apologize, get the proposal in. And I knew we would submit it after the deadline. But I would just tell you, from a standpoint of, as this building goes through renovations, it would be a natural segue to be able to relocate existing entities in another building. It's right now 18% vacant, so there's some opportunities there. But I do have concerns about the city acquiring a lot that's a 14,000 square foot lot once you tear down that building. We don't have costs on what it will cost to remediate the contaminated issues with that building. It's a very expensive process from other buildings I've looked at, and that'll in that comment.
Thank you. Are there questions for Ms. Volk? Questions for Ms. Volk? Okay, hearing none.
Madam Mayor and members of the council, my name is Astrid. I'm the owner of the Plains Hotel downtown, and I want to support utilizing the Cary Building, Z Building site on many levels. The strongest one is, as I live in the Plains Hotel for the last 2 years, I've noticed the pedestrian count downtown to be, in my opinion, 10% of normal most of the year. And we need a pedestrian bump in downtown to spur retail, to spur residential, or anything to make this downtown turn around. So any downtown in the middle of downtown, I'm very, very interested in getting bodies downtown. It's just amazing, and you can see the amount of blighted and abandoned buildings, and it's 300,000 square feet, etc. You've already heard those numbers. I also think that by taking our downtown and treating it like the pearl it is, that we will start to get the quality of life that businesses look at Cheyenne to make decisions about moving in to our town. I think we will retain a staggering amount of young adults that leave Cheyenne for other downtowns, basically. They're looking for that fun, etc. So I think treating our downtown as a major project is extremely important to the workforce, to businesses looking at Cheyenne to come in. I just cannot tell you that it's very abandoned and blighted. I also appreciated the talk about how many parking spaces would be required. And on that one, I think this Spiker garage has an $8 million debt still on it. And I'm not sure how quickly the payments are needed. But having the Cary building being very full and spurring, more pedestrian count downtown, I think will help pay that Spiker garage debt down faster. And then my hope is that there will be another garage in the Plains Hotel area where we have 300,000 square feet, half of it vacant now. So there's something that's just not right, and I'm thinking that we absolutely need to correct the downtown, turn it into a pearl, have more fun. We need human beings, a number of them, every hour on every block, and I believe this is a big opportunity to step into that right direction. I also think there's a lot of great ideas that I've heard from private people about bringing in residential into downtown, but the residential's not taking off because we're not committing ourselves into any downtown. So again, any location downtown would be great. I think the Cary building would be fantastic. And that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Astrid? All right. Thank you so much. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Mayor. Ben Troutline, Coldwell Banker Commercial. I'm here representing 508 West 19th Street, the Pioneer Printing Building. And I just wanted to add a little background on, we also submitted, but we did submit late. And the reason we submitted late was because it was a business decision by my owner. He, at the time, during the RFP, he didn't have the opportunity to submit a response for his building. So, but after the new year, it quickly became apparent that his building would be available, which is why we provided the information when we did. And I just wanted to make one comment that wasn't in my proposal and that's been discussed a bit tonight. I think overall with these existing building options, both the city center building and the Pioneer Printing Building, I believe it would actually be a faster process if you have an existing building and going through, a new RFP process or whatever that would be, but the actual construction of a new building that had existing bones, that would probably speed up the overall process. So I think it would provide an economic benefit with an existing building. And then finally, I just wanted to touch on 508 West 19th. It is a 25,000 square foot building and has a 14,000 square foot lot that could be used for parking. So just for approximately the same price and remodeling that building, I believe you could get the same kind of facility you would at the Z's Furniture site. And those are my two comments.
Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Troutline? Thank you very much for coming tonight.
My name is Dale Steenbergen at the Greater Cheyenne Chamber of Commerce. I would tell you that we're not here to comment about your process. That needs to be something that you're comfortable with. And we're not arrogant enough to come here and say, this is the place this building, this court should go, and that's where it should stay. But I think we do have a concern that we discussed in board today, and that is, as we look around the community, there's certainly problems that the only way they're ever going to be fixed is if we find a combination of public and private dollars to fix that. I think we all know that the Heinz building is one of those projects. The Z's building is one of those projects. Probably the Cole Shopping Center comes close to being some of those projects. So I think what we'd really encourage you to do is look for opportunities to fix some of our problems, right? Rather than, I hear a pretty big hassle about this and end up somewhere on a vacant lot when there's certainly some opportunities to fix the issues we have in that community, in the downtown. So we would just ask you that you take a good hard look at some of those opportunities. While we have, not very often we have this much money to spend, that we spend it in a way that would start picking up some of the blight that we know exists in the community and making sure that we strengthen the downtown core and West Edge. Thank you.
Are there questions for Mr. Steenbergen? Questions? Thank you very much. Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. My name is Chuck West. I represent Mr. Lim, the owner of the Z building. Madam Mayor, if I may answer Mr. Case's question that came up, I think it probably is best. I believe, Mr. Case, you wondered about what happens if the council decides to either go out on a new RFP or delay the process in some way. What happens with the existing owners? Would they put the building back on the market, try to sell it? Was that basically your question? I don't want to answer the wrong question. That's
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Case.
To clarify, not so much that as in if we approve this tonight and move forward with the Z's location or the Cary building, or we should just pick a name and call it that.
The courthouse.
They all are foul.
What are they 100% committed, or is if a better offer were to be presented than we're talking about here tonight, sometime between now and us getting a contract complete, where are we at?
First of all, there's that complexity that exists because the affinity group has the building under contract and they have to decide if they're going to purchase it by this Thursday. If they don't, the owner is willing to allow the city attorney, myself, or whoever the negotiating team is for the owner, a reasonable amount of time to come under contract and keep it off the market for that time. I would suggest that period would be no longer than 60 days, preferably 30. I don't want to put the city attorney under a lot of pressure, but that's a reasonable request. Normally when you sell a property, people have time to do a little investigation if you really want to find out about the water issue, even though I think Vicki explained it, and the city consultant explained that there's not going to be a basement, so it's not an issue anyway. But things like that take a relatively short time, say less than 60 days, could even be a contingency if the city needs it. Now remember, this owner is an absentee landlord sitting on a vacant building, paying $10,000 a year in property tax, and he's got a lot of incentive to make this work. And the city is in a perfect position because of, as Dale explained earlier, this kind of building takes a combination of private and public funding. It's unlikely that a private sector person is going to come in, even at a higher price, and be able to do anything to investigate the building in 90 or 120 days, just realistically. City already knows the building. You've seen it. Vicki's been through it. So 30 to 60 days, it could even be a contingency with this particular owner if you chose the building. I don't know if that was an extended answer, but hopefully it answered your question.
Madam Mayor, for the most part, and I don't want to get out of protocol here. It answers my question, I guess, to the point of you mentioned a group affinity and that they have a right of refusal that expires this Thursday.
Correct. And it's actually under contract. It's not a first right of refusal.
Okay.
And they need to decide to remove all their contingencies and close by March 9th. They may still decide to sell it to the city. I have no idea because their representative is here. You can probably ask him if that's an important question.
I guess, Madam Mayor, really what, and to this moment I still haven't made my mind up, what I'm trying to avoid is a situation where we approve this tonight and at a future date this falls apart because the owner of the building or some representative thereof says, yeah, we don't want to sell it to the city.
All I can do is assure you that an owner sitting on a building vacant for 10 years paying property tax does not have the incentive to continue for another 10 years. And I've told them that. So I think there's plenty of incentive on his part, and I'm dealing directly with his California counsel in this, so it's not just the owner I've been working with. We have made a lot of headway.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One other comment, Madam Mayor. Vicki made the comment about construction price increases. I do a little developing myself, and I think her number of 5% is very conservative. The builders I work with are looking at potentially a 10 to 12% increase this year alone. And this is mainly due to all the disasters we've had around the country. It's driving the price of construction up. Home Depot stock is at an all-time high. Builders that I work with are saying that they can't even find electricians because they're being sucked away, if you will, to California, Texas, bigger states that have bigger contracts. So the supply and demand equation is not working in our favor, and it looks like prices are going to go up much more than the 2% the government is projecting, and I believe, in all deference to Vicki, more than 5%. So if there are any other questions, I'm here to respond.
Mr. Weber.
Mr. West, in
Yes.
your proposal, you came in at $275,000.
Correct.
Affinity Ventures gave us no price submitted. Do we know what they're going to ask for the building if they decide to do it?
Their representative is here, whether he wants to speak to that or not. I don't know if he can speak to it, but
Please do.
It's not my client, so I can't respond to it. I see he's approaching or leaving, one of the two.
If you could please address the question. Thank you. State your name.
Jim Weaver with Number One Commercial. I believe that the question was, why wasn't there a price? Or what is the price? In all due respect, Mayor, through you, the RFP really didn't ask for pricing. And that's, I think, part of some of the nebulous aspect of this whole process right now. If you read through the RFP, the individuals responded, some of them didn't put price in because it wasn't asked. But as it was going through the process, it appeared that prices were being applied to the RFP by the consultant. And whether or not those prices were accurate wasn't clarified. I mean, nobody asked any questions, and through you, Mayor, it was mentioned that nobody called and said, what's the price going to be of the submittals? And so there wasn't any knowledge that there was a price consideration in it, to be very blunt.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Weber.
I guess what I'm asking is, do you have a price?
The proposal from Affinity included the concept of doing a turnkey, which is different than what is being discussed of just buying the Cary building itself. So it's more complex than that, in that it wasn't really defined clearly what the court wanted. The idea that they had brought to the table was, let's see if the Cary building's the right site, which was in the RFP process. What's the best site? And then it was thought there was going to be further conversation about, here's what is going to be built, or the city wants to have built, and then they could go through the process of a turnkey pricing, but not knowing what ultimately was asked for in terms of the municipal court. It just said, I believe the term was a common municipal court or something like that. It was very vague, actually, and that's why there was no price given by the Affinity Group.
Mr. Weaver, I find the phrase turnkey very vague. Could you please describe to me what a turnkey
In
would
the
be?
response from Affinity Group, they were pretty clear that they were willing to sit down and discuss what the requirements were going to be, and that there are multiple ways to go through the acquisition by the city. One thought was to actually lease it with an option to buy for like $1 at the end. And again, this was a concept that they had that would allow the city to collect the capital improvement funds through the years and make that the lease, and then at the end they would just acquire it. But there's an infinite number of ways to do these kinds of projects, and it was the idea of the affinity group to come to the table and have those conversations. Because in 3 weeks' time, there wasn't enough to have any conversations, really, other than just to submit a site.
Okay. Madam Mayor, just a comment.
Mr. Whipple.
Just, with the turnkey operation, it'd just be my worry that by an odd coincidence, it came in at $9 million.
Yeah.
So.
Understand, but there would, again, it would be a contract that would be negotiated, and so it could be 9. It could have been less than that, depending upon what the requirements were, and it would be a negotiated price and a negotiated project from soup to nuts, if you will.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Further questions of Mr. West? Okay, thank you, Mr. West.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, my name is Joel Hickerson. I have children who attend St. Mary's Catholic School. I think we've pretty much hit it home with Ms. Hack or with Ms. Nemechek, but I wanted to confirm the lot north of this building is no longer being deemed a viable location for the municipal court. It sounds like there are others that are going to suit that need better. Is that correct?
For clarification, actually, no. The proposal here tonight is regarding the Cary building. Should this body decide to vote against this, then everything's on the table,
Okay.
including our north lot.
All right. If that's the case, I will be showing up again to oppose the building of the municipal building north of here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Blythe McAndrew, the current chair of the City of Cheyenne Historic Preservation Board, and I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of that board. The Historic Preservation Board has been following this issue since it became public that this site was being considered as the site of the new municipal court. And with that, we have an understanding of the complexity of this issue. And after listening in tonight, I have an even deeper understanding of some of the things that you're facing in making this decision. As the process is worked through, I think it's really important that the historic significance of the Cary block, which I propose that as the name that we call it, being the building's original name when it was built by Joseph M. Cary in 1876. It is one of the oldest buildings in Cheyenne. It is also at the center of the Downtown Historic District, which is a National Register of Historic Places listing. And knowing that, I think it's important in consideration of this to take into account the Historic Preservation Board's request to be part of the conversation around the demolition of this building and the redevelopment of the site for city use, if that is the direction this goes in. And in reading the article in the paper this morning, I'm kind of inspired to speak about that in a different way. 2 birds with 1 stone. And what I'd like to say to that is perhaps there's a way and a reason and a need to save some of those feathers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oh, questions? Hold on just a minute in case you've got questions. Are there questions? All right, thank you very much.
Madam Mayor and Council, I'm Pat Lane, the principal at St. Mary's. And I was, kind of thinking the same thing with Mr. Hickerson, that it was going to be off the table. And after the response, it kind of scares me because, as a principal, my greatest role is the safety of the children. And, it's great when a kid comes home, learns how to read and write and do math as a parent, but you really want them to come home safe. And I think putting that municipal courthouse across from my playground where my kids are walking to the mass, they're great kids. We've got 2 here that are great, but things can happen where they can run out in the street with that, the traffic really scares me. So please don't ever consider putting the courthouse next to my playground. Okay?
Thank you. Will you hold on just in case there are questions? Are there questions for the principal?
Just a comment.
Mr. Johnson.
You're currently standing in the courthouse.
Temporarily.
Thank you. But it's right across from my playground.
Thank you very much, Principal.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. My name's Joe Doherty. I live at 225 Hobbs Avenue. I'm a private citizen. I almost don't have a dog in this fight. However, I'm familiar with the Joseph Carey block, and if you'll indulge me for a minute, I want to read you a quote from the Omaha Daily Bee in March of 1876 that states, "The best block between Omaha and Salt Lake City is that of J.M. Carey and Brother, and an illustration of which appears on the front page of today's newspaper." And this is a picture of that building. I've shared it with you all. It's a fine building, and believe it or not, that is what that building looks like underneath that pink metal facade. And I hope that building, somebody will find a way and find the money and restore it. I don't think knocking it down is a good answer for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is if you knock it down and you put a one-story building, you're going to be looking at the facade of the buildings behind that, and it's going to look an awful lot like the hole looks in the old Western Ranchman lot. And I don't think that's what people want to look at. I don't think that's what people think is good. So I'm going to close by saying, more than anything else, and I believe in private-public partnerships to the end of the world, but I don't believe you should tear this building down with 1% tax money because you didn't ask the taxpayers for permission to do that when you went to the ballot a little over a year ago. So with that, I'll close. I hope you find a suitable location, but I don't believe the Joseph M. Carey building is it. Thank you.
Thank you. Hold on just a minute in case there are questions.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Case.
Questions around that, but not necessarily for Mr. Doherty. I want to make it clear, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if we move forward with this location, that is absolutely the intent, that we would demolish the building because someone's analysis basically says that the historical preservation costs and everything that are going to go along with that are going to well exceed $9 million if we go that path. Correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Mr. Case, that is true, and there's nothing that would stop any other purchaser from knocking it down as well.
And number two, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that building is so contaminated with things I don't even want to talk about up here on the dais, that remediation itself is just going to be an extraordinary amount of money.
Mr. Case, that's true, and perhaps Mr. Griffith, I know he spoke to it before, as far as structural engineering reports and concerns regarding the structural soundness of this building. Is this a good time for your answer on the structural soundness of that building?
That would be my third question and later, and my understanding is that the structural soundness is not good.
Mr. Griffith.
Madam Mayor, Mr. Case, there is no question that the building is structurally not sound. As you go into the building, the first floor has a great deal of problem, and as you go up the building, there is certainly, if I can quote you, things that we need not talk about, but they are certainly there. When you walk the floors, you don't know whether it's just the plaster off of the ceiling, it's the bird refuge, and on and on and on. The building structurally, though, with my structural engineer being there, is either very, very bad shape or it will cost 3 to 4 times as much money to try to save the building. It can be done. Anything can be done for money. But I would tell you at that stage, you're talking of something in the 20 or 30 million dollars. We did not look at it that way. It simply was not realistic for the $9 million budget we have. And so therefore, we did not put a dollar amount on what it would be. My engineer would tell you very quickly, they have, as an engineering firm, saved buildings and structures like this. They've also saved the exterior faces of buildings, tore down the interior, if you will, and reconstructed it. And each of those ideas are extremely expensive. So again, well outside of the $9 million that we have. Did that answer what you wanted, sir?
It does. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Griffith.
Thank you. All right, other questions of Mr. Doherty? Thank you very much for your comments.
Jim Weaver, number 1 commercial. I just came back because I do have some comments regarding the process, and I was only here earlier just to answer a question. But specifically to the process, I already described that there was no real definitive request about pricing, and there weren't any follow-up questions, as the mayor has pointed out. I also brought to the city the response for the vacant lot, and in that there was some discussion as to it wasn't to the right size. But if you read the RFP specifically, there was a typo in there that they said it was 11,000 square foot lot. But if you look further into the document, there were quite a few drawings that showed it being on 2 lots, that it would support the size of a court as described in the RFP process. So while I appreciate that it wasn't appropriate to change the answers to the exam, it seems like there were questions asked along the way about the Cary building, whether it was during the tour or you heard that there was discussion about where the water came from. I mean, there was some points of clarification made during the process, but only to the Cary building. And my thought in this whole process is that $9 million is a lot of money for the city to pay for a building. And to rest the whole project on the process that we followed up to this point, which appears to be to have a few questions in it, it would be appropriate to go out. There were a couple bids submitted afterwards. Yes, it's going to take another 60 days maybe to do this, but isn't that a more appropriate way to approach this project than to say this is the one building and there's no other solutions? So I just leave you with that, and I'll answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Weaver? I have a question. When did Affinity go under contract with Mr. Lim for the property?
It was a few weeks before the RFP was called, I think. Actually, it was called, but it was during that process that it went under contract through the RFP process. So I don't remember exactly when it was an RFP was called for, but the due date in that process they acquired it. And again, it was in the spirit of doing I call it a turnkey, and I know it bothers you. What does that mean? But there was the concept that there would be a lot more discussions about what the solution could be for the city. And it was all about, yes, there'd be a developer in between, but there was a concept that maybe a developer could build it faster, less expensive than the city trying to negotiate it, because it didn't really say clearly what was the intent. Was it just to buy a lot and then the city would develop it? Or is it to buy a lot and then contract somebody else to do it? You know, it wasn't really clear. It was almost, and I had responded this way to the newspaper, that there's a lot of options out there, and it was a great process just to throw it up and see what really sticks. And so that's the spirit that some of the responders gave their RFPs.
Thank you very much. Okay. Other questions? Okay, thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, council members. My name is Nick Circadakis. I am a parent of a child that goes to St. Mary's. I'm here to really just protest any kind of courthouse being built within proximity of that school. My child goes there. He's 5 now. My daughter, when she's old enough, will probably go to St. Mary's as well. I don't think how close that one particular lot is conducive to a school environment. I would say that I think we can all agree that most people do not leave courthouses very happy, and I would hate to present a crime of opportunity such as being across the street from a playground or a elementary school, essentially, as a good place for someone to vent their frustrations of coming to the municipal court and having a bad day in court. I think that's a fair point. And council member, I know you did point out that this is currently the city court. I'm not very happy about that because, again, it is very close proximity to St. Mary's School, where my children will potentially go and go now. I don't think this is a proper courthouse. I would hope that if further discussions are to keep the courthouse here, that I'll be here to protest that as well. But again, I just don't think it's a proper place for a courthouse to be so close to children, especially of that age.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Other questions? Thank you very much. Good evening.
Hello, my name is Mike Solis, and first of all, I just want to thank everybody in this council for everything you do. I really appreciate all the work and passion you put into our wonderful city. I'm here tonight just as a citizen to make a few common sense comments and share how I feel personally about this building. First of all, I'd like to see the courthouse in historic downtown, not on the outskirts of downtown. The center would be very much preferred because I believe that this would have a huge transformative effect on downtown. Could be one of the most important acts that you guys might make on this council during your tenure. The Cary building is not deficient. It meets all objectives, the space, parking, security, and the budget. I just want to remind everybody of that. That's what I've heard tonight. So what are we doing here? It seems like we're scolding staff for moving too quickly, too efficiently. I think that's very strange, and that doesn't seem to be very common sense to me. We're debating barely relevant concerns, and we're wasting $37,500 of taxpayer money every month that a decision is not made. I don't think that's acceptable, and I don't think that's good governance in any city, state, or country. That's a huge amount of money to waste every month. As for the RFP process, this is another thing I find very strange. It seems the timeline was sufficient, and for those who weren't able to submit, that's up to them. That's on them. And I think in business, in any form of business, you've got to move fast. And if this RFP was a priority, that should have been made a priority, and they should have met that deadline. I don't know what world you can arrive last and take first place. That doesn't make sense to me either. So again, it meets all objectives. It could have a huge effect on downtown. I really don't see what the debate or the holdup is in this decision. That's all I have.
Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Solis? Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Volk, what I'm going to ask you to do is wait for your second chance. We allowed Mr. Weaver to speak as he was originally just answering questions, and so for your second time, if you would let others speak first. Thank you so much. Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. My name is Chanda Spears, and I speak on behalf of St. Mary's Elementary School and Catholic School, but not only as a parent to my two boys over here who are sitting quietly. I'm pretty proud of them, but also as a teacher. I teach in the district. And one of, as Mr. Johnson brought to our attention, that we are currently standing in the courthouse, and I implore you guys to notice when you walk in that there is a metal detector placed in front. And it's not just for the security of you guys, but for those who come into the courthouse. And for that purpose alone, it's not placed just for decoration or anything else, but for the safety. And there is a reason, because you never know who comes in or who's going to be upset leaving, as the prior gentleman spoke about it. As a teacher, like, we have so many things going on in our day, and to have one more thing on our plate, like as far as worrying about a teacher, a disgruntled citizen coming across the street. I do not work at St. Mary's. I just want to reiterate that. But I know several of you guys have children or grandchildren in the district, and I loved that you guys took into consideration the safety. Thank you for that, of our children across the street. But if anywhere else in the city, if there was a courthouse placed across the street from any of our other district schools. I work at Prairie Winds, and so there's plenty of space out there. But if there was a courthouse put across our street, I guarantee you would also have a courthouse full, or excuse me, not a courthouse, a room full of concern. Sorry, as well as you guys should be. I have friends who work in the courthouse, and they have talked about several disgruntled citizens coming up to them just like in their day-to-day basis. And I would hate for my children to be concerned. They know the things that have gone on in the nation just this past week and the past month. And they are very well aware, and they've spoken about their own safety. And to now have to worry about their safety across the street is huge. And we talk about, they worry enough about, Mom, you tell us not to talk to strangers, but here you send us to a school where we don't know anybody. But now not only that, I have to talk to them about people across the street being those people that might not make the best choices in life. But yet I'm sending them to a place right across the street from these people that I'm trying to teach them to like protect them against, you know? And so I implore you guys, even if we don't purchase the building that was spoken of before, to consider that when you guys put it back on the floor. That that might not, the north parking lot, yeah, that has a great area, but there are children that walk to the library. I bring my elementary students to the library to do research. I can't imagine having to have that conversation about, okay, you need to stay together, hand in hand, my fourth graders, so that I can keep you safe from the people across the street that might be sitting in the parking lot, who knows what. Or my children across the street at St. Mary's who have to then not only worry about going from St. Mary's to the church as they walk to Mass, but out on the playground. Just those simple things. So please, if you guys don't purchase the building that's been spoken of, please consider that again, and really consider not just across the street from St. Mary's, but also any other school. I mean, you wouldn't put it in front of another school in the district. I please implore you to consider that again when you bring it back to the floor for looking at the north parking lot. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Thank you so much for your time tonight. We're just big kids.
It's okay.
Good evening.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council. Thank you for taking time to hear my comments. My name is Natalie Bell. I'm a mother of 2 children who attend St. Mary's Catholic School, and I'm here to offer respectfully my heartfelt opposition to the north parking lot location for the municipal court. I think that many of you as fellow parents, those who are grandparents as well, can all agree with me that we live in very difficult times. As a mother, it's my biggest priority is to keep my children safe, to do everything I can in my power to do that, and I know that that all of you stand with me in that. I think that that's something that is a priority for all of us, keeping our children safe, especially while they're being educated. And I do not feel that having this located across the street from a school helps us to meet those types of goals at keeping our children safe. And so I would appreciate if that's something that you guys will take into consideration if this offer is off the table tonight, that you consider that going forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Ms. Bell, any questions? Thank you very much. Good evening.
Mayor and Council, I am a person, I wasn't really going to come to speak on this, but I think that I have a duty as a certain individual for the downtown. I own 3 buildings downtown, or part of. I own Ruby Juice, 17th Street Executive Suites, and Grandpa's Pizza.
Can you identify yourself?
Steve Bourne, sorry. I'm a developer and a realtor, and have invested very much compared to anybody probably in the downtown. I have lived it. I think both Mr. Roybal and Mr. White know that I spend an unbelievable amount of time thinking how we could cure the Bell building in the block that goes from my building all the way to the street. Indeed, there's been lots of details tonight. I agree with Mr. Laburn. There's been lots of things. I studied the whole process that was going on with the Cary building. And I'm also a member of the DDA, so I spend at least 2 to 3 times a week just talking about the downtown. I think this is a real interesting situation because this is a time where you as council, these buildings are almost impossible to resurrect. I am somebody that loves historic buildings. It gets to a point where some of these buildings get so degraded that it's unfeasible as a developer to recreate or put them on. I'd be the first guy the Cary building would mean everything in the world to me. Mine is, the Montgomery building is on the registry. But you're here with a decision that's bigger than life, because you have to look towards the future. We're now about 25 years, I would take it almost 20, behind the development of Fort Collins. You must seize the moment now, okay? You have a chance where you can take public money. It might not be the clearest pathway, and it's not going to be an easy one. But you built a beautiful parking structure, and you're sitting with a building that is degrading right before your eyes, right next to it. We have another gentleman who is ready to build a restaurant, Mr. Galiotis, and his building is sitting vacant. There's some times where you got to stand up and take a look at the wisdom. We're at the end of the corridor for there might be a train someday, which probably is going to come. But we have to show that we want that train, we want the development. We've got to turn the downtown around. You have a big opportunity to make that change. It won't be easy. But these buildings have to go. I don't have to tell you, you hear about it all the time. You have to make a decision tonight. Do you want to change the future of our town? You must look at this, and I think the Cary building is an extreme example of something that does have to come down. It can't stay there. And once this building turns, from a development standpoint, others will take notice like they did in Fort Collins, and more buildings will turn. So I can't tell you if all the logistics are exactly right. I think you brought up some good points tonight, Mr. Laburn, but the building must go. It's time to seize the moment. You're here to represent our community for the future. And that's a decision that you must take into place. It's a perfect opportunity. It is not going to go away without public and private sector, and this is a great time. It's not the most beautiful thing, but we've got to do it.
Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Bourne? Thank you, Mr. very much. Good evening.
Madam Mayor, my name is Marcus Kroll. I am a father, a parent to a student at St. Mary's School. I stand here in solidarity with Mr. Lane and other parents of this school. Indications from what I have seen are that the proceedings of the city staff have been good and proper, that the process has been vetted, and that the Z site should be the preferred site. We are against the site that is being considered to the north here. Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you so much for your time tonight. All right, Ms. Volk, and then anybody else for their second time. Come forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Mayor. I forgot to mention, on the City Center building, for a 36,000 square foot building with an adjacent parking lot with 90 parking spaces, the price tag on that is, in the proposal, was $3 million. As Mr. Troutwine mentioned, the Pioneer Printing Building is $1.7 million. This is well below the $9 million the taxpayers voted for. When we look at buying a 14,000 square foot lot for $275,000, that would be a fraction of the size, but it's going to be up to close to that $9 million figure. I would just think very long and hard about what we're actually buying there for $275,000 that takes the price tag up to $9 million.
Thank you. Thank you. Questions for Ms. Wolk? All right. Astrid, for your second time.
Thank you for allowing a second time. I really, when I've lived downtown now in the Plains Hotel building for 2 years, and I see the lack of pedestrian, the lack of retail, the lack of, development of downtown, I've actually done some math, and the amount of downtown, if you will, churn money is somewhere under about $12 million a year. If we bring this kind of activity that spurs more investment into downtown, I see that 12 million doubling, trebling, quadrupling. So not only is this downtown blighted and abandoned, we're not making any money. We're not having any fun down there. So, well, we are having some fun. But I'm just talking about turning this thing around so that we retain our workforce, we retain our young people, we encourage other people to invest in downtown. And I don't know who doesn't know me, but I love historic and heritage.
to the max. And I agree with Steve Warren. There may be exceptions where something has to go to start a domino effect. That'll be very worthy. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other further public comment tonight? Any other further public comment? All right, hearing none. This goes to Mr. White.
Madam Mayor, the motion to accept the proposal from Chuck West, number 1 Properties, Inc. of Cheyenne, in an amount not to exceed $275,000 died. Therefore, there is no recommendation from the Finance Committee on this item.
Do I hear a motion tonight? Okay, do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Wardlow.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Luna. Discussion by council. Discussion by
Madam Mayor.
council. Mr. Case.
I'll kick it off. I'm a cautious no on this evening. I'm not necessarily against this location, but I think we've certainly uncovered some deficiencies in the process and the lack of transparency. I don't know whether the applicants were verbally interviewed. It seems to be an inadequate review on such a major capital project. I'm not necessarily no on this location in the future, but I believe we need to do a better job reviewing all of the potential locations. I'll also leave you with my opinion on the 2110 Neal site based on some of the data that was revealed tonight, and I certainly will dive into that a little bit deeper, but I'm hesitant to move forward with the location that we sit at.
Thank you, Mr. Case. Other discussion by council? Mr. Johnson?
Yes, ma'am. My concern's more as far as like the steering committee and Councilman Cook that attended. There was more of a reference that was made in jest tonight that alarms me. When Councilman Case asked for us to identify a name, you made in jest that we call it the courthouse. And so by just making something in jest with 4 city staffers and 1 city council member, I kind of agree with Councilman Labron that maybe this was steered in a weird direction.
Mr. Johnson, to clarify that, certainly it could be called the Cary Courthouse, it could be called the Z's Courthouse, it could be called the Fowler's Courthouse. It was not meant to be taken that way. Other questions or comments from council?
Madam Mayor, as far as the 2101 O'Neill on the north side, I don't think that should be even in our periphery. We didn't know 30 years ago or 20 years ago that we were going to have a library next door. We didn't know St. Mary's was going to build a school there. So I think with the things that came into play in the last few years, I think that should be off our table.
Thank you for that comment. Other comments or questions by council?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Johnson.
Just to follow up, when the separation with the courts happened via the county courthouse, Mayor Kaysen actually was trying to pursue other avenues to get the courthouse away, because we were on such a tight timeline for the 6 penny. The way the ballot language was drafted was, at that point, he had had no success in finding an alternate courthouse, and so therefore the ballot language was drafted to have 2101 O'Neill Avenue as just a backup, so that, and then he also included, or had staff at that time drafted, that we could pursue any other avenues, which is why this entire proposal is up here. As far as, I did remember, and sorry, I'm not as young or as old as some in the room, but I did remember that when I grew up, St. Mary's in Seton was actually adjacent or across the street from the Supreme Courthouse, and that was for several years before they moved over to their current location. And I guess if I really wanted to say something, the state capitol is across the street from St. Mary's, or was for years. and I trust them even less than the criminals.
Thank you, Mr. Graves. Other comments by council?
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Cheyenne.
just briefly, you know, when this was put on the ballot, the express language was to build the courthouse at 2101 O'Neill, and that's what the voters saw when they read it. Now, it does have a sentence in there that says, or another location as deemed appropriate, and that's why we're legally able to talk about these other locations. But when it was put on the ballot and the voters ultimately approved an extension to this building, and you know, in regard to this courthouse being potentially close to a school, certainly understand traffic concerns. Those are always an issue when kids are out and about. But we also, this isn't state district court, federal district court. I mean, I for one have had a traffic citation. We're dealing with misdemeanors. We're not dealing with hardcore criminals coming in here too, and I want to make that clear. And Councilman Laybourne actually started the discussion on this topic about an hour ago or more, but we may be left with no choice but to extend at 2101 O'Neill. I for one, was excited about the options that we had presented to us and the possibility of being able to go into a building in the core of downtown and use the money that the voters gave us to revitalize downtown on a building that the private sector probably feasibly could not ever do on its own. That was an exciting prospect to me. But as Councilman Laybourne stated, we have conducted renovations on this facility, 2101 O'Neill, as you can see out right into the restrooms out there. Likely that has triggered an ADA responsibility on the city to bring the rest of this building up to code. The initial estimates I've seen are in 7 figures. And so in order for us to be able to afford the necessary ADA compliance renovations that have now, in my opinion, been triggered, we may very well have to use that $9 million to build a courthouse here and upgrade this facility. And so that is why I think folks need to understand that we may not have a choice but to extend at 2101 O'Neill because of ADA compliance. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Other discussion by or questions by council?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. White.
The process for the RFP did bother me because I thought it was much more expeditious than what I'm used to with my day job. But however, just because it was just because it asked for a faster response than the 30 days that I normally work in, doesn't mean that it was wrong. And I guess the one thing that I can't get past is we have an opportunity to accept a proposal where we're going to build a municipal courthouse and take care or remediate a property that I don't see any other situation becoming feasible to do that. I think if we don't act, and I love history, I consider myself a historical preservation guy, but this building, I mean, we talk about health, safety, and welfare. This building is a health and safety tragedy waiting to happen. There's no private person that's going to come in and spend the type of money that's going to be needed to take care of this. And the longer it sits there, the more safety hazard it becomes until it's just going to collapse on top of itself. And then what? Then what do we have? Then we have another hole. So I guess, and I get the concerns about the ADA. Ms. Moore and the plan that moved forward with once the Ice and Event Center, that to me, and I work for Workforce Services, so that is something that we do dabble in from time to time with regard to facilities, employer facilities and ADA regulations. So I get that concern. But if not now, with this opportunity in front of us, then when? Do we just kick the can down the road so that the governing body of 2030 is still wrestling with what to do with the Z's location? I mean, the three things that I get asked more than anything, more than any other question, is Heinz, Hull, and Z's building. I get asked about those three properties probably more than anything else. And if we have the opportunity to take care of one of those and cross it off the list, then I think we should do it. So I'll be voting yes.
Thank you, Mr. White. Any other discussions by council?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Laybourne?
Well, this has been a really interesting discussion tonight, and one that obviously has a lot of varying opinions. But as a council, I hope we look back on what was on the ballot. It wasn't downtown redevelopment. It was not that this is the last and final hour to deal with a problem property. It was not to spend the amount of money necessary to purchase the property and then demolish it. And I'm unfamiliar with any schematics or designs that have been brought forward for this no basement option here. First time I've heard about it tonight. So we're just not ready. And we shouldn't be making a commitment to something that has so many entanglements and side issues. We need to look at our responsibility to that $9 million. And having been in this room a lot over the years, I believe that when we reach decision points where we say we're going to lose $35,000 a month if we don't do this, do it tonight, have almost always been the wrong decision. This isn't something we need to rush into. The court's here. I think it's going to be a matter of community discussion for a long time. If other adjacent properties that are available and don't have those tremendous demolition costs are excluded because of a flawed RFP process. There's no doubt there's some good intentions here. But I don't believe that they overcome our responsibility to be fiscally responsible with that amount of money and that necessary public purpose. We should reject this concept and find better means to erect that courthouse. And I speak as a downtown property owner that's been involved in these issues for many years. This is not the magic wand that's going to turn us into Fort Collins. This is grafting a problem with a problem property owner onto a ballot issue that the voters approve for the purpose of a municipal court, not downtown redevelopment. So I urge the fellow council people to take a deep breath here. Let's think about this. Let's consider it. And let's cast a wider net. Let's discuss and relate to the issues that have been raised. But acting on this tonight is going to cause more trouble down the road than we know. It is a hurried up proposal sold on the basis of a problem that has no relation to the placement of a courthouse. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Laybourne. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
All right, those opposed? Mr. Johnson, Mr. Laybourne, Mr. Case, Mr. Shaner, Dr. President Rennie. Those in favor? Mr. White, Mr. Roybal, Mr. Luna, and myself. Motion fails. Next item is number 18, other business. Is there any other business to come before the council tonight?
Madam Mayor.
Public comment first.
You probably don't want it.
Good evening.
Good evening. Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, my name is Steve Earnshaw. I am pastor at Frontier United Methodist Church, and I am here representing several folks who have been concerned for the well-being of the roughly 30 families residing in the trailer park at 316 Central Avenue. Perhaps those who are with me could just raise a hand. Always speaking for all of us. I have personally been giving modest support to one of the families there. That's how I got involved. They called asking for firewood. We did not give money to buy firewood. We did not give them money. We gave them firewood we had available. It is our belief that this current situation is unsustainable. So we're not by any means trying to continue this. After deliberation in several meetings, the course of action that we have decided to take is to create and distribute a flyer with the names and contact information of various support organizations, some of the things that they do, so that those folks could be aware of those things. We're also talking about putting faith community names there, that people that could help with that, with those needs that they would have. The reason that we're here this evening is to voice our support for a healthy solution to this unsustainable situation for all persons involved. We're here to ask the City Council, where possible, and I understand this is a complex issue, to give us any advance notice and any sort of overall strategy that you might have, so that as we work to support people who contact us, and we know that they wouldn't all support or contact us, but those that would contact us, that we can advise them with realistic information. And while we realize this sort of thing is never simple and the time frame impossible to predict for certain, we're here to ask for as much guidance and or warning from the city officials about just how the city intends to move forward in this situation. Specifically then, what we're asking for is what the city's preferred outcome is. We're looking for a limited voice in the planning actions the city officials intend to take, not so much to shape that in any real way, but rather to allow city officials to have a broader perspective when making plans. And we're asking for a realistic timeline that the city officials intend to adhere to in regard to enforcing various code violations. In conclusion, our aim is to be as helpful as possible, supporting the interests of all the people involved. And we agree that the situation at 316 Central Avenue is undesirable and unsustainable for our city and for the residents who live there. So we're hoping that if concerned citizens work together to support each other and support the leadership of the city, everyone concerned will benefit from our efforts.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Any questions, Mr. Laybourne?
Well, my first question, Madam Mayor, is I've never seen us use the screens in this manner. I'm glad that we're using them tonight, but how did that come about?
We hit the power switch. Mr. Laybourne, I'm sorry. We took photos were taken this week of the. Let me backtrack. We received word from Compassionate Cheyenne that they were going to be discussing this under business, and for the reference of not only council but others in the audience, we took photos this week of where things stand essentially as of this week, because this is certainly something that we've been talking about for months.
Well, Madam Mayor, I'm glad to see these photos. I think they clearly and absolutely demonstrate that human beings shouldn't be living in this trailer park, and that these trailers have deficiencies that cannot be corrected. But there's a point I want to make tonight. I've been concerned about this issue for many years. I'm concerned about those individuals. I certainly welcome all the help that compassionate individuals are interested in providing. But there's one special individual that we don't have at the table, and that's the property owner. The property owner that has taken advantage of these desperate people for years. The property owner that has ducked, dived, and dodged through every legal means possible to maintain this situation. And I don't know, other than taking strong action on the part of the city, how we deal with that. That property owner benefits from this situation. That property owner has benefited from this situation for years, and in my opinion, wants to continue to do that. So I'm certainly glad to participate in any way that I can. And I recognize that it's very difficult